North Sea, we will produce more and more green electricity. Some of that green energy we will transition into hydrogen. We can do that either onshore by bringing the electrons by the cable to shore and then transform it into hydrogen, or do it at the source and make hydrogen at the wind farms and then bring it to shore through a pipe. Which of those makes most sense? The conventional wisdom is, if you can do it onshore, do it because it's much cheaper and faster. Only do offshore if it's really far away. Maybe that is a misconception, and here to explain that we should do a lot more offshore is René Peters of TNO. René, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Soon, the North Sea will be full of wind farms, more and more, and they will be even further from shore than the ones we build currently. A lot of that we will transform into hydrogen, either because the industry needs it or we need it as a buffer. The big question is, should we do it onshore or offshore? You are going to explain to us that it's much sooner than we think. It makes sense to do it offshore. You say if the wind farm is 100 kilometers away or further, and if your electrolyzer is 2 gigawatts or more, then already it makes economic sense and there are other benefits.
Then it's a no-brainer, because you already said there's this convention that whatever you have to do, if you can do it onshore, it's cheaper than offshore. On the other hand, if you need to convert energy from one carrier electricity to the other, and you lose some energy on the way, it's better to convert as close to the source as possible. So that actually drives hydrogen towards offshore. And then it's a balance, right? What is the most economic solution? What's the benefit from going offshore? And what's the benefit from onshore? And how do they balance out? And the current understanding is indeed that if you go to large-scale parks, so say 2 gigawatt or more, and if you move far offshore, like say 100 kilometers or beyond, and those are the wind parks of the future, then it's beneficial to go for offshore.
Okay, you're going to explain how it works and also how it is additional benefits for the ecology and the energy transition. Afterwards, we're going to discuss what the implications of this knowledge are for the energy transition. Take it away.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you already heard with the previous presentation, the first demo for offshore hydrogen, Poseidon project. It's very close to shore. You can even see it at the coast of Scheveningen, of The Hague. But it's a demo, it's a pilot. So the question is, what will be the next step and where will we go in the future when we are moving further offshore? Let me explain why offshore hydrogen production is actually a good idea and why we are going there. Well, first of all, I think these numbers you're well aware of. The ambitions for offshore wind are huge, not only in the Netherlands, but also in the whole of the North Sea. All countries around it have similar plans. And all the wind parks also in our neighboring countries are moving further and further offshore. We also have a target for hydrogen production. In the Netherlands, it's about 3 to 4 gigawatt hydrogen production in 2030, which preferably is at the industrial clusters near shore with power from offshore wind. And also in the European scale, we have an ambition of 40 gigawatt of hydrogen production, all more or less connected to offshore wind production with countries around the North Sea. So the whole North Sea is in transition. I think we already heard from Neptune. We're moving from gas to hydrogen, but obviously we're also building a lot of new wind parks offshore. So we will have a complex system at the North Sea where we'll have wind parks. We still have the assets for oil and gas production, platforms, depleted fields as well, and also pipelines. And one of the challenges we will have in this design of the future system, where we'll produce electricity, we'll produce hydrogen, natural gas. If we want to produce hydrogen from this electricity, will we do that onshore with onshore electrolysis, or will we produce it offshore? And if we produce it offshore, there's also the additional benefit that we can potentially store the hydrogen in either salt caverns offshore or depleted gas fields, and then produce a stable stream of hydrogen to the market, industry preferably, where hydrogen has the highest value to the market. Why would you go for offshore? Well, we already discussed it a little bit. It's about the scale, it's about the distances. It's also about transport capacity of the onshore grid. We all see the challenges of the grid operator, TenneT, to bring all that electricity into land and further towards the market. There's already a lot of challenges to get the connections through the the nature-sensitive areas to shore, especially in the north. And the capacity of the grid is just not sufficient to bring all that electricity inland. We also need balancing of the system. The reason that there's problems in the grid is not only the growth of demand, but in particular the instability of the power which is injected into the grid. So we need balancing capacity, we need storage capacity, and hydrogen can provide that solution. But there's also a big benefit of existing infrastructure offshore. In this picture on the dotted lines, you see the main trunk lines of gas transport in the Netherlands, which will become available around 2030 for alternative use. And hydrogen is one of the potential uses, where you see that they are actually also crossing quite a number of future wind parks that are planned further offshore and further beyond 2030. And then there's another argument why I think it will accelerate. That's because there are significant space limitations onshore. Because although there's plans for onshore electrolysis, the capacity that can be realized is limited because of the space constraints. Think about Rotterdam, Maasvlakte area. The capacity is about 2 gigawatt of onshore electrolysis capacity, and then space is limited. And that's already the area which is booked more or less for onshore electrolysis over there. Amsterdam, for Tata Steel, for example, they need a lot of hydrogen. With a full plan, they would need 600 kilotons. In the reduced plan, it's even half. It's still half. And they need a lot of electrolysis capacity. Think about 3 gigawatt, which definitely would not fit in Amsterdam. So you have to move offshore or bring it via pipelines to that location. So space limitations will also drive hydrogen production to offshore. So it can be cheaper. Why can it be cheaper? Also because transport costs for electricity are increasing. We saw the announcement by TenneT that grid costs to bring offshore electricity to shore will come at a higher cost, with an added cost of about 4 cents per kilowatt hour to bring the electricity to shore. If you convert that to the cost of green hydrogen, it already adds up to €2 per kilogram of green hydrogen only for the transport cost of electricity. If you go to offshore, you don't have that transport cost because you produce it directly at the wind parks and you save the transport cost, and as a result, €2 per kilogram for the green hydrogen production. But also there's an ecological impact. If you don't have to develop all these power cables to bring the electricity to shore first, impacting biodiversity and the ecological value of the North Sea, but you can reuse pipelines which could individually transport 10 to 15 gigawatt of energy in the form of hydrogen. You actually disturb nature less than you would have with new cables. And also, actually, pipelines are much more reliable than power cables. So there's a lower risk of failures in the system. So we think there's really a drive towards offshore, and that could even go faster than we think. Now, this is a graph I borrowed from a Roland Berger report. I see Martin in the room. He recognizes this one. This is why is offshore so fast cheaper than onshore? And it's in particular because of the cost of the converters and the export cables, which actually linearly increase with the scale, while a pipeline can easily handle 10 gigawatt in this example without increasing the scale. You only have to increase speed or pressure in the system. So actually this balance is quite positive already when you go to 2 gigawatt or more. Now then which type of form will we see offshore electrolysis in the market? There's basically high over 3 options. You can combine electrolysis with the turbine. That's the decentralized option. And then you have a scale of about 15 to 20 megawatt, let's say the same scale as the turbine itself. And the turbine would be producing hydrogen instead of electricity. And then you combine the hydrogen to a compression station, for example, to feed it into the pipeline. The other one is more the centralized solution. So bring it all together on a platform. Design the platform to a scale of 300 to 500 megawatt. That's the plan actually also of the Dutch government to bring this into reality in 2031. And then with the future wind parks of 2 gigawatts, you can have about 4 of these platforms at each wind park. And the last option, and that's where we really go to big scale and far offshore, that would be energy islands and energy hubs, where you're actually combining different functions. So it could be the combination of power from different wind parks, the conversion to hydrogen, storage of energy, maybe even storage of CO2. So bring actually multiple functions together and create interconnections also to different countries around Europe. And this you could do on scales 10 gigawatt or even bigger. Well, you've seen Poseidon, the demo we are working on. It took about 5 years to get to this point. We have to accelerate, we have to go faster, because we want to go to 500 megawatt in 2031. That's the Dutch ambition. It's a policy stated by our Dutch ministry. There's also public funds reserved to realize that, but it means we have to scale up from 1 megawatt to 500 megawatt. We cannot do that in one scale. Probably have to have at least 1, maybe 2 in between. So the Dutch government want to fund a 100 megawatt demo and a 500 megawatt demo to scale up to that level. But we really have to accelerate the learnings. There was a question about what did we learn from Poseidon. We cannot wait for sharing the learnings of Poseidon until we finished the whole project, because the next project already has to be designed and decided before Poseidon is finished. So we have to learn to share the learnings from these kind of pilots much earlier in the development before we start the next project, because otherwise we have a lack of time. So this is a design of the 500 megawatt system. Many partners are working on design of these systems. This is one we designed within a collaboration program, North Sea Energy, together with IV, Offshore and Energy. And we actually managed to get a system with 500 megawatt on a platform which also can be maintained and inspected and operated, we think, around 2031, which is the target date. Now, this development is nice, but it cannot be realized without the right connections to the infrastructure. Well, you probably all are aware of the hydrogen backbone development of Gasunie, which actually just recently has started in Rotterdam, the first section, which is quite relevant to connect all the hydrogen production offshore to the Rotterdam area. But we also need connections near Den Helder, for example, maybe Amsterdam and Eemshaven in the north. And also very important for the longer term is to connect it to the offshore grid. Could be either the existing infrastructure or maybe also additional new pipelines needed to connect all the wind parks to the onshore grid. And then on the longer term, the bigger picture, of course, this is not only an initiative in the Netherlands, there's also plans in Germany, there's ideas in the UK, Denmark, and we really have to build a big offshore grid to connect all the countries around Europe and the wind parks for the hydrogen transport. Could be partly by reusing and retrofitting existing pipelines, maybe even blending hydrogen with natural gas in the beginning to make a start. On the long term, pure hydrogen transport and interconnections. And of course, potentially also adding new pipelines, for example, to the north to connect Scotland, where there's a huge amount of wind plant and hydrogen production. So conclusions, we think offshore electrolysis can even be cheaper than onshore if we go to large-scale production, above 2 gigawatt, order of magnitude, wind parks far offshore, and then the additional advantage is having the option for storage offshore and the benefits of a lower impact on ecology, and maybe even potential for acceleration. The options of decentralized, centralized, or energy island options, I think, are all still under study. We are working very much on the centralized platform solutions, but it doesn't mean that in-turbine or energy island solutions are not economic. It's all to be decided. And we think it's very important to look at pipelines, not only new ones, but also retrofitted pipelines, which are able to handle hydrogen either in a blended or pure form. And additional to that, also think about interconnections to our neighboring countries. And the first pilots, not only in the Netherlands actually, also in Germany, are planned in the Netherlands 100 megawatt in 2028, demo 1, and 2031 will be 500 megawatt. We need to hurry up. And also in Germany, there's an area dedicated for offshore hydrogen production, also around 2030. And that's where I leave it for now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, René. Applause for this. What are the if this holds true, what are the consequences for, let's say, the tenders for wind parks we're going to see? Are they going to be impacted by this?
Yeah, that is a very good question, because there were a number of tenders before the one which is now open, IJmuidenver, which did include system integration. And system integration is very important to actually adopt and get all the energy generated from wind into the energy system, which could be a conversion to hydrogen. It could also be by adding storage or adding floating solar, you discussed it already, or linking it to dynamic users, end use of electricity. But hydrogen is definitely one of them. And you see in the tenders that the first initiatives of combining offshore wind with electrolysis is under development. Hollandse Kust West is working on it, RWE, but also in the Crosswind project with Shell, the baseload power hub is an example of offshore hydrogen production on a scale of 2.5 megawatt. But for future tenders, it becomes more and more important to have also this combination of hydrogen production and wind generation offshore to accelerate this deployment.
And are there consequences for the development of a hydrogen market? Is the hydrogen market looking exactly the same if it's produced onshore or offshore, or you get a whole different market?
If you look at it on national scale, I think it doesn't make a huge difference whether the hydrogen is produced offshore, brought to shore, and then fed into the hydrogen backbone system and to the hydrogen market. But I think there's also a need for a European market for hydrogen. So you can have the hydrogen produced offshore, not only back to the Netherlands, but also connected to Germany, for example, to bring to the German market or to the UK market or the Danish market. So it's important not only to build up the Dutch hydrogen market, but make it a European market for hydrogen.
Last week I was at the European Hydrogen Week in Brussels, where we talked about the European hydrogen backbone. They showed us a map of how the backbone should look like. Yes. There are a lot of pipes under the North Sea. Is production on source bringing a European hydrogen backbone closer to reality, or does it matter?
I think offshore hydrogen would bring the offshore hydrogen backbone faster. Because it's very valuable if you produce hydrogen offshore, that you're not only are able to bring it back to the country where you produce it, but also connect it to other countries. And of course, there's now also interconnectors for natural gas. And in the future, we also expect interconnectors for hydrogen. Actually, the visions on how this offshore hydrogen infrastructure should look like are not yet very concrete. Because the European hydrogen backbone plan is quite concrete for onshore, but not so concrete yet for offshore. There's a first sketches from Gasunie, for example, and also in Germany. But it's not yet set in stone. There's still a lot to be decided upon. Also, how it actually interacts with the electricity backbone offshore. Because also there are big plans. The TenneT, for example, having the target grid plans. And it's important to have a well-connected system between electrons and molecules in the future.
But would you say if we do more offshore production at the North Sea and have the connecting infrastructure for it, we will see a hydrogen market around the North Sea much more interconnected emerge than if we do it via electrons to shore?
Yes, I think so, because the alternative is that everything is electric, and you have the wind parks and a lot of electric connections, a lot of H voltage DC connections to shore, potentially also interconnections. And then the hydrogen is actually used in the country itself because it's produced onshore. If you start producing it offshore, there's a need for the offshore pipelines to bring the hydrogen to shore, but it also starts building the hydrogen offshore infrastructure and the integrated grid offshore.
Then there's the need for speed. On the one hand, there are pipes in the North Sea that we could recommission and refit. On the other hand, there are still a lot of pilots where we need to figure out how it exactly works and how prices are developing. Which one is faster?
Well, I think reusing existing infrastructure can be much faster because we know how long it takes to build new pipelines and to build new infrastructure. In general, you can say it takes 10 years. 8 years is discussion, 2 years is building and operating. If you have existing pipelines, you have to retrofitting, you have to clean them, you have to make sure they can handle hydrogen, but that's a much shorter period of time.
But so are those advantages outweighing the risks of the unknowns of production offshore?
Well, that's to be found out, I would say. I mean, we have to start these pilots and demos quickly to learn. And René, before this presentation, already mentioned that we learned a lot in the Poseidon project just by doing it. We solved 100 questions up front, but there were 100 new questions when we start to build and contract and develop the project. And the same we will learn when we scale up the projects and start also building new infrastructure in the North Sea to bring all the hydrogen to shore.
What should be the main consideration for everybody here at the exhibition who's one part of the value chain and the offshore energy system? If we are really going to do much more and much faster offshore production, what is the main takeaway for most people here?
Well, I think the important takeaway and message I want to bring across is that offshore hydrogen is needed, because if we want to reach our targets for wind deployment towards 2030, 40, 50, realize that in 2040 the Dutch target is 50 gigawatt. Already in 2030 we will have 75% of our electricity system greened with offshore wind. So we will produce much more electricity from offshore than we need in the electricity grid, so we need to convert to hydrogen anyhow. And the challenge is TenneT has to bring all this power cable to shore through sensitive areas. Think about the Wadden area. It needs an innovative and a creative alternative. And I think hydrogen offshore and using pipelines,
this morning, hydrogen
pipelines is one of those potential solutions.
And this morning, Hydrogen NL also said the Netherlands has a much better competitive advantage if we do offshore, because we have a lot of pipes coming onshore, but no space for on. Is this also a bit of the self-interest of the Netherlands polluting this discussion?
It's not polluting, I think. It's actually the opportunity that we have, because we do have, of course, a huge offshore sector in the Netherlands. We have a huge experience with working with gas, with molecules. So we know how to handle molecules, which was natural gas, will be hydrogen. But we have also the North Sea as our backyard, which is an excellent playground, let's say, for these kind of technologies.
Wonderful. So. Thank you so much for this insights, and hope next year, if you are again on this stage, that you wear the same suit that you wore on the platform. Looks much nicer. Thank you so much. Big round of applause, René Peters.